This is the DAR Today podcast, and I'm your host, Brooke Bullmaster Stewart. Well, this Favorites series replay today is about an incredible group of women that came together during World War I to come to the aid of a grateful nation. They were known as the Women's Land Army originally, but then they soon renamed themselves the Farmerettes. It's such a delightful segment, and the creation of the segment was a bit of a labor of love. So this story started to develop between myself, with Chris Hurst-Loeffler, and Sherrie Stein, two crazy talented writers on our committee. And we really realized that we needed more information, kind of like that segment we played last week about Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, who really we felt like there had to be more to that story. So we wanted the whole inside scoop on this organization. So Chris and Sherrie reached out to Kate Sklikas of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers, who sent us the most amazing treasure trove of information. God bless her. Links to articles, stories, everything. I can't even imagine the time it took to compile this list of information that she sent to us. This was such a fun story to cover. And of course, most all of us have heard about what women did during World War II, right? With stepping up, helping out, Rosie the Riveter, women working in the factories, that sort of thing. But how many of us really knew about the women who stepped forward in World War I? Our committee certainly didn't. Most of our committee didn't anyway. And besides what Kate sent us, the National Archives was such a wonderful repository of graphics that were able to be used in this segment for the video version on YouTube. And speaking of graphics, I have to say I had the incredible honor of being able to include a photograph of my own ancestors in this story. You'll see, if you're watching the YouTube version, a group of almost 20 people proudly standing in front of their automobile on the farmlands there in Missouri. And so this is an image that includes my grandmother, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. So what a great honor to be able to include them in this story about our American farmers. And this is one of my most prized possessions from my grandmother. But we do hope you enjoy this segment today, an original replay from October of 2023. And as you know, you can use these segments as part of your chapter meetings to be able to send out to your family and friends. And also you can include a link. If you do a digital newsletter for your chapter, you can include a link to the audio and the video versions of this podcast, and we would encourage you to do so. So we hope that whether you've seen this segment before or not, that you really enjoy it. And of course, as always, we are so happy and grateful that you're with us here today. Did you know that October 15th is considered the Day of the Rural Woman? Well, in honor of that fact, we bring you the following story. Perhaps you haven't heard about it in the past, and you might find it as interesting as I did. During World War I, thousands of young women took to the fields to put food on America's tables. Their story is one of initiative and determination, a truly American story. The United Nations International Day of Rural Women, observed on October 15th each year, serves as a reminder of the vital role that women play in food production, farming, and rural development globally. When you think about a farmer, you probably visualize a man. But did you know that 36% of U.S. farmers are women, and 56% of all farms have at least one female decision maker? Women have long been involved in farming, often working alongside their male counterparts, but their contributions have sometimes been overlooked or underestimated. The efforts of all farmers are crucial for ensuring food security, sustainable agriculture, and the economic development of these rural communities. In the April of 1918 Daughters of the American Revolution magazine, there is an article with the title, "Women to Train as Practical Farmers." These women would train to become part of what was called the Women's Land Army of America. This quote-unquote army was a volunteer organization that would address the labor shortages in agriculture due to the mobilization of men for military service during World War I. These hard-working ladies would fondly be referred to as Farmerettes and were an icon of World War I, much like the Rosie the Riveters of World War II. These women symbolize strength, resilience, and determination of women in workforce during wartime. So where did these women train, and what role did the DAR play? Well, the opening paragraph of that 1918 article says it all, and I quote, "American women will lay down knitting needles and bandage rollers and take up the shovel and the hoe as practical farmers of the 3rd Encampment of the National Service School to be held in Washington, D.C. from April 22nd until June 1st, 1918, end quote. Each state regent was to appoint a student to the specially formed Company of the States, it was called. The tuition, uniform, and railroad expenses were paid by money pledged by DAR members. The National Service School was devoted to military preparedness for women. The Army, Navy, and Marine Corps all cooperated with the instruction, and this 3rd encampment included the Department of Agriculture, who directed intensive farming courses. The DAR-sponsored students would also learn food conservation, which included the making of Liberty bread. Liberty bread was considered quick bread, so no yeast, and it called for bran, cornmeal, or even potatoes as a substitute for wheat. The first and second school encampments in 1916 and 1917 were to prepare the students for national preparedness and for Red Cross and relief work. As the war requirements changed, so did the school curriculum. The school's goals emphasized training young women to become immediate assets in the war effort. The Farmerettes were urgently needed to increase food production, and that's why the 1918 encampment was all about food, and also about getting the Farmerettes out into the fields as quickly as possible. Unlike many organizations contributing to the war effort, the Women's Land Army of America consisted of all-female leadership and all-female staff. I think we daughters can appreciate an all-female-run organization. And according to Kate Sklikas of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers, her research found that these so-called farmerettes came up with that name themselves. I think it's kind of cute. Well, these young women had beaux, brothers, fathers, and cousins in the military, and they were looking for ways to fill that void. Kate and other Farmerette researchers affiliated with this National Society Descendants of American Farmers have located over 2,400 names of Farmerettes. Initially, the Women's Land Army received no federal funding or even state support. In fact, many Americans apparently viewed female volunteerism in general with a wary eye, describing it as akin to, and I quote, "a frivolous search for entertainment that needed to be controlled rigorously lest it detract from the serious business of war," end quote. However, the ladies proved particularly adept at fundraising, no surprise there, and some had already gained leadership experience with various civic and academic organizations. They gained the support of women's associations like ours, the DAR, and also from local businesses. They organized bake sales, concerts, and movie nights. By the summer of 1918, the Farmerettes were on the job, or should I say in the fields, in 33 states. The Women's Land Army employed roughly 15,000 to 20,000 women between its beginnings in late 1917 until it was disbanded in 1919. Berry College, known well to DAR members, spoke of its Farmerettes celebrating the desire of female students to contribute to the war efforts. Authors in this article in the Southern Highlander magazine remarked on the willingness of the college male students to soldier and that of female students to volunteer to drive tractors and keep the farm going in their absence. These women played a vital role in keeping food on America's tables and helped supply the military with much-needed provisions. Most of the women who joined the Land Army had no prior experience in farming, but they quickly learned to plow fields, operate tractors, plant, and harvest crops. And unlike other roles that women filled to help the war effort, the Farmerettes were actually paid. In California, fruit growers had lucrative contracts with the military to supply troops with dried and canned fruit. However, they also had a huge problem, an extreme labor shortage. The California Farmerettes were able to demand equal pay to their male counterparts. They also demanded an 8-hour workday and negotiated overtime. They were even given workers' compensation insurance, which was considered quite radical for the time. And speaking of radical, the Farmerettes in this women's land army also wore pants and coveralls, a huge divergence from women's traditional dress. Well, after the end of World War I, the Women's Land Army of America was disbanded as the soldiers returned home and once again took up the plow. Want to learn more about the Women's Land Army? Elaine F. Weiss's book called Fruits of Victory, The Women's Land Army of America in the Great War discusses more background history about the leaders, the origins of farming education, and the deployment of trained farmerettes. Throughout history, women have continuously rolled up their sleeves and played crucial roles during times of conflict and crisis. Daughters did what was required to serve home and country, and the Women's Land Army provided a generation of women with agency and inspiration. I'm sitting up a little bit straighter, knowing I am part of this organization which has such a proud history and such a sparkling future.